Okay, let's dive right in. We're looking at some really fresh information today, focusing on that recent SpaceX test flight, Starship.
That's right. Yeah, we've got a couple of reports here covering the latest flight test. Happened just this Tuesday, May 28th, 2025.
And our plan for this deep dive really is just to stick to what these specific sources are telling us. We want to walk through the events they describe, what actually happened during the flight, according to these reports.
Yeah, and figure out what the outcome they describe might mean for, well, for the bigger picture of the Starship program.
Exactly, because the headlines in these sources, they mention the Starship spinning out of control, crashing. Sounds pretty dramatic.
It does. The reports definitely describe some, let's say, significant issues, not quite the smooth flight they might have hoped for, based on this.
So, okay, let's track it. This was Starship Flight 9, the ninth test.
Ninth test, yes. And the components involved, according to the articles, were the super heavy booster, that was booster 14, and the Starship upper stage, ship 35.
Okay, booster 14, ship 35. And didn't one source mention booster 14 had flown before?
It did, yeah. That's a key detail they highlight. It flew earlier this year on Flight 7, so they were definitely testing reusability again here.
Which is, that's central to the whole Starship idea, isn't it? Full reusability. Using a flight-proven booster is a big step, even in a test.
Absolutely. And the overall mission goal, as laid out in these articles, was pretty ambitious for a test. They wanted Starship to get up to a near orbital path, simulate orbit entry, and then come down for a controlled splashdown.
Controlled splashdown.
Yeah.
Where were they aiming for?
The reports say the target was way over in the Indian Ocean, so like halfway around the globe from the Texas launch site.
Wow. Okay. And it wasn't just an empty ship going up, right? There was something inside.
Correct. The sources mention it was carrying 8 simulated Starlink satellites, not operational ones, but mock-ups.
To test the deployment system. Like practice actually delivering a payload.
Exactly. Testing that satellite dispenser mechanism, getting ready for, actual future missions, as one report puts it.
Okay, so reusable booster test, long-duration flight simulation for the upper stage, payload deployment test. Quite a lot packed into Flight 9.
Definitely. So the launch itself, the sources say it went off from Starbase in Texas. One actually gives a time, 5:00 a.m. India Standard Time, which is interesting.
And the very first part, the liftoff and booster separation, how did that go according to the reports?
Looked pretty nominal at first. The sources say just a few minutes after liftoff, the super heavy booster, all 71 meters of it, separated cleanly from the Starship upper stage, just as planned.
Okay, good start then. So the booster heads back down.
Right. It starts its return trip, aiming for that controlled splashdown near the coast. But this is where the first major issue crops up in the report.
Whoa, what happened?
Well, sources state that SpaceX lost contact with the booster while it was coming down.
Lost contact. So does that mean it crashed? Or they just don't know?
The implication in the articles is that, yeah, without contact, it couldn't perform the controlled landing burn or splashdown, so it likely just, fell into the sea uncontrolled.
Ah, okay. So booster 14, the reused one, was lost on descent, according to these reports. Bummer.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the upper stage, ship 35, it just kept climbing, heading towards that high point in its trajectory.
Did it reach the planned altitude?
It did, actually. The reports say about 9 minutes after launch, it hit its intended suborbital path. So from an altitude perspective, that part of the mission profile was achieved.
Okay, hitting the altitude mark is something, but I'm sensing a but coming.
Yeah.
The sources then talk about problems with the upper stage too.
Yes, this is where the reports detail a whole sequence of things going wrong. First up, apparently the payload bay doors didn't open.
The doors for those simulated satellites, so they couldn't even test the deployment.
Nope. That part of the test failed, according to these sources. The door stayed shut.
Okay, that's one issue. What else?
Well then, just minutes later, the reports say the spacecraft started spinning. Out of control.
Spinning? Like tumbling end over end up there? That sounds bad.
It certainly suggests a major loss of attitude control, based on the descriptions. And it didn't stop there. The sources also mentioned that shortly after it started spinning, it began leaking fuel.
Seriously, payload doors stuck, then it's spinning and leaking fuel. That's quite the chain reaction of failures reported here.
Yeah, it really sounds like things unraveled pretty quickly for the upper stage at that point.
So what happened then, if it's spinning and leaking?
Predictably, I suppose, the reports state that controllers eventually lost contact with the ship altogether. One source even quotes SpaceX's commentator Dan Hoot from the live broadcast.
Oh yeah, what did he say?
The quote is, Just to confirm, we did lose contact with the ship officially a couple of minutes ago, so that brings an end to the 9th flight test. Pretty definitive confirmation there.
Wow, okay, so official loss of signal. And if it was out of control, spinning. What ultimately happened to it?
The officials quoted in the reports believe it re-entered the atmosphere, still out of control, and likely broke apart somewhere over the Indian Ocean.
The Indian Ocean, where it was supposed to splash down, but obviously not like this.
Exactly. The right location, but definitely the wrong condition for arrival.
So if we just look at these reports, the outcome was the loss of both stages. The booster lost during descent, the upper stage lost after reaching altitude, but then suffering multiple failures.
That's the summary based purely on these sources, yes. But, the articles also make sure to frame this. They bring up Elon Musk's whole vision about Mars colonies, moon bases.
Right, the grand plan. Starship isn't just another rocket.
No, it's meant to be this fully reusable transportation system for, well, potentially getting humanity out there. To the moon, Mars, and beyond, as they say.
So even with a test ending like this one reportedly did with loss of vehicle, the sources suggest it's still considered a step forward. Learning from failures.
That's the perspective presented. Gathering data on why the payload doors didn't open, why it lost stability, why it leaked fuel. That's all crucial information for iterating the design, especially for something this complex, aiming for human spaceflight eventually.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's try and boil it down. Based only on these reports we've discussed, what's the snapshot of Starship Flight 9?
All right, quick summary from these sources. Flight 9 used a previously flown booster, Booster 14, and the upper stage, Ship 35, carrying simulated satellites. Contact was lost with the booster during its return, so it was likely lost. The upper stage made it to its target altitude, but then experienced, well, a series of failures. Payload doors didn't open, it started spinning uncontrollably, leaked fuel, and then communication was lost.
And it ultimately broke up over the Indian Ocean during re-entry, according to officials cited in the reports.
That's the picture painted by these specific articles.
Okay, so we've traced the reported events of Flight 9 from the initial separation to the loss of both the booster and the upper stage, highlighting those specific issues like the spin, the fuel leak, the payload door problem. Hopefully, walking through this gives you, our listener, a clear idea of what these sources reported, helping you get up to speed quickly.
It's definitely a complex outcome, shows progress in some areas like reaching altitude, but also highlights some, well, pretty significant hurdles still ahead.
Absolutely. Which leads to maybe a final thought here. Given the huge ambition of Starship, full reusability, taking people to Mars eventually, and considering the specific multiple failures reported just in this one Flight 9 test, what do you think might be the single biggest remaining challenge for SpaceX to actually nail this whole thing down and reach those ultimate goals based just on what we've read here today? Something to maybe mull over.